Sometimes, the difference between life and death is the one person everyone ignores. The monitor wouldn't stop beeping, sharp and relentless, slicing through the sterile air like a warning no one could silence, and I remember thinking how strange it was that something so small could sound so loud when everything else felt like it was collapsing. Because 24 doctors stood in that room, 24 of the best, their white coats stiff, their voices low, their eyes avoiding each other, and still, none of them knew what to do. I shouldn't have been there. I was only covering my mother's shift, just a maid's daughter carrying a tray of untouched coffee that had gone cold hours ago. My sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as I hovered near the doorway, invisible, exactly how people like me were supposed to be, unnoticed, unheard, irrelevant, but I couldn't look away. The baby on the bed was so small, barely bigger than a pillow, his chest rising too fast, too uneven, like he was fighting something no one else could see, wires tangled around him. Machines blinking, numbers dropping in a rhythm that felt wrong, not chaotic, just wrong, like a pattern out of place, and then the room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just a subtle silence that fell like a shadow when he walked in. Adrian Voss didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He stood there in a dark suit that probably cost more than my mother made in a year, his presence filling the space in a way I couldn't explain. Calm, controlled, terrifying without trying. His eyes moved once across the room, and every doctor straightened like they'd just remembered how to breathe. "Fix it," he said quietly, and somehow that was worse than shouting. I felt my fingers tighten around the tray, my heart beating faster, not from fear, but from something else, something I hadn't felt in years, recognition, because I had seen this before, not the man, not the room, but the pattern, the mistake, the way everyone was looking in the wrong place while the answer sat right in front of them. My mother's voice echoed in my head, telling me to stay back, to keep my head down, to never get involved in things that didn't belong to us, and I almost listened. I really did. I took a step back, ready to disappear like I always had, but then the baby's hand twitched, just slightly, just enough, and no one noticed, no one except me. My breath caught, my pulse quickened, because I knew that sign. I had studied it, memorized it. Watched it happen once before when no one believed me then either. "He's not responding," one doctor muttered, adjusting something on the monitor. "We're losing time," another added, but they were still wrong, all of them. And the worst part was they didn't even realize it. I felt it building inside me, that same pressure, that same choice, stay silent and walk away, or speak and change everything. My grip loosened, the tray tilted slightly, coffee sloshing against the rim, and, before I could stop myself, before fear could pull me back, I stepped forward into a room where I didn't belong, my voice barely above a whisper, but somehow loud enough to cut through the noise. "You're looking in the wrong place." No one spoke after I said it, not immediately, not even the machines seemed to change their rhythm, but the silence shifted, heavy, sharp, like the air had been cut open and everyone was waiting to see if I would bleed from it. I felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward me at once, disbelief first, then irritation, then something colder, because I had broken a rule that people like me were not supposed to break. "Excuse me," one of the doctors said, his voice tight, controlled. The kind of tone people use when they are deciding whether you are worth correcting or dismissing. I swallowed, my throat dry, but I did not step back. I could not anymore. "You are treating the symptoms," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But his body is not reacting like a standard case. A few of them exchanged looks, subtle, dismissive. One even shook his head slightly as if I had confirmed exactly what he expected. And nobody speaking out of turn. "You should leave," another doctor added, already turning away from me as if I had disappeared the moment he stopped looking, but I could still see it, that small, uneven movement in the baby's hand, the way his fingers curled tighter on one side than the other. The faint change in his breathing pattern that no machine was tracking, because machines only measured what they were told to measure, and people only saw what they expected to see. "His right side is responding differently," I said, louder now, the words coming faster before fear could catch them. "Look at his hand. The muscle response is not symmetrical. That is not a general failure. That is localized. This time, one of them hesitated, just for a second, just enough, and that was when everything changed, because hesitation meant doubt, and doubt meant possibility. I saw it ripple through them, small but real, and then I felt it, before I saw it, the shift in the room that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with him. Adrian Voss moved closer, not quickly, not dramatically, just one step. But it was enough to make the others part slightly without realizing they were doing it. His gaze settled on me, steady, unreadable, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood something I should not have. Understood. He was not looking at me like I was out of place. He was looking at me like I had just changed something. Say that again, he said quietly, and his voice carried more weight than all the others combined. I felt my pulse in my throat, my hands trembling just slightly at my sides, but I did not look away. I could not. You are treating this like a systemic failure, I repeated, slower this time, choosing each word carefully, but it is not. Something is affecting one side differently. You are missing the source. The doctor who had spoken earlier frowned, stepping forward, his authority returning like a shield. This is not your place, he said firmly. But Adrian did not look at him, not even for a second. His attention stayed on me. Unbroken, calculating, and that was when I realized something that made my chest tighten. I had not just interrupted a room full of doctors. I had stepped into a world where one man decided who mattered and who did not, and for reasons I did not understand, he had decided. I did, if you are wrong, the doctor continued, but Adrian raised his hand slightly, and the man stopped mid-sentence like the words had been taken from him. The room fell silent again, but this time it was different. This time it was waiting. Adrian's eyes did not leave mine as he spoke, low and controlled. Then she is wrong, he said, simple, final, and then, after a brief pause that felt longer than it should have, but if she is right, you will listen. I felt something shift inside me, something irreversible, because in that moment, I was no longer invisible and I knew, with a certainty I could not explain, there was no going back from this. No one argued after that, not out loud, not with him standing there, but I could feel the resistance in the room, thick and unspoken, like a wall that had not fallen yet, only cracked. The lead doctor exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. His pride still intact but bending under something stronger. Fine, he said, though it did not sound like agreement. It sounded like calculation, like he was already preparing to prove me wrong. What exactly are you suggesting? My heart skipped, just once. Because this was it, the moment where thinking was no longer enough. Now I had to be right. I stepped closer to the bed, closer than I had any right to be. The machines hummed beside me, numbers flickering in patterns that felt almost familiar now. I focused on the baby's hand again, the slight asymmetry, the tension in the fingers, the faint delay in response. It is neurological, I said quietly, more to myself at first, piecing it together as I spoke, but not originating where you think. The response pattern suggests a localized disruption affecting motor signaling, not a full systemic collapse. One of the doctors scoffed under his breath, but another leaned in slightly, curiosity slipping through despite himself. I reached out, hesitating for half a second before gently adjusting the position of the baby's arm, watching closely, waiting. The movement confirmed it, subtle but undeniable. There, I whispered, more certain now. The delay is not random, it is consistent. I looked up, meeting their eyes, then his. You are treating the effect, not the cause. You need to adjust the approach before his body shuts down from the wrong intervention. Silence followed, heavier than before, because now there was evidence, not just words. The lead doctor frowned, stepping closer, examining what I had pointed out, his expression shifting, just slightly, enough for me to see it, enough for everyone to feel it, doubt turning into consideration. Run a targeted scan, he ordered suddenly, his voice sharper now, urgency replacing skepticism. Focus on localized neural activity. I want confirmation. The room moved instantly, energy snapping back into place. Nurses adjusting equipment, another doctor calling out instructions. The machine beside me emitted a new sequence of tones as data recalibrated. I stepped back, my role suddenly unclear again. My hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. I had crossed the line, said too much, done too much, and for a moment I wondered if I had just made everything worse, if I had misunderstood something critical, if this would all collapse because of me. The seconds stretched, long and suffocating. Every sound amplified, every breath heavier, until finally, the screen changed, numbers shifting, patterns emerging, and the doctor stared at it, frozen. That is, not where it should be, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Another doctor leaned in, eyes widening. He is right, or she is. The correction came late, but it landed. I felt it in the way the room looked at me now, no longer dismissive, no longer indifferent. Something had shifted, something irreversible. The lead doctor straightened, turning back toward the bed, his voice firm now, decisive. Adjust the treatment protocol. Now, and just like that, everything moved again. Faster this time, more precise, like they were finally aiming at the right target. I stood there, barely breathing, watching as the changes took effect, waiting for something, anything, to tell me if I had been right. And then it happened, small at first, almost invisible. The baby's breathing steadied, not completely, not perfectly, but enough to feel the difference, enough to change the direction. The monitor's rhythm softened, less frantic, more controlled, and someone let out a breath they had been holding for too long. I did not realize I was smiling until I felt it, faint, uncertain, but real, until I felt his presence again, closer now, beside me instead of across the room. Adrian Voss did not look at the monitors. He looked at me, and there was something new in his eyes, not relief, not gratitude, something sharper, something that felt like a decision being made in real time. "What is your name?" he asked quietly, and for the first time since I had stepped into that room, I hesitated, because I understood, deep down, that answering that question would change everything. My name felt heavier than it should have in that moment, like it carried more weight than just letters, more consequence than just an answer, and for a second I considered lying, giving him something simple, forgettable, something that could slip past him the way I had slipped through most of my life, unnoticed and untouched. But his eyes did not allow that. They held me there, steady, patient, as if he already knew I would tell the truth, as if he was not asking for information but confirming something he had already decided. "Lily," I said finally, my voice quieter than before but no less certain. "Lily Carter." He repeated it once, not loudly, not for anyone else to hear, just enough to test how it sounded, like it meant something now, like it would matter later. And then he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible motion, but it felt final, like a door closing behind me without making a sound. I swallowed, suddenly aware of everything again. The room, the doctors, the machines, the fact that I was standing where I should not be, saying things I was not supposed to say. "You should step back." My mother's voice cut in sharply from behind me, her hand gripping my arm just tight enough to pull me out of whatever space I had stepped into. "She is not supposed to be here," she added quickly, her tone apologetic, directed at the doctors, at him, at anyone who might still be deciding what to do with me. I let her pull me half a step back, but not fully, not completely, because part of me was still watching the monitors, still listening to the rhythm that had changed, still waiting for confirmation that I had not imagined it, that I had not risked everything for nothing. "The response is stabilizing," one of the doctors said. His voice lower now, more careful, like he was choosing each word with precision. Another nodded, checking the readings again. "It is not a full recovery, but it is better." Better felt like the most important word in the room. Better meant hope. Better meant time. Better meant I had not been wrong. My chest loosened slightly, the tightness easing just enough for me to breathe again. But before relief could settle, I felt it again, his attention, sharper now, more focused. "You noticed something 24 trained specialists missed," Adrian said, his voice calm but carrying something beneath it, something deliberate. "Why?" It was not a casual question, not curiosity. It was assessment, calculation, like he was measuring something he could not yet see. I hesitated, not because I did not have an answer, but because I did, and it was not something I usually shared, because I have seen it before, I said quietly. My gaze dropping for just a moment before returning to his, and no one listened then either. The words hung between us, heavier than anything else I had said, because they were not about the baby. Not really. They were about something older, something unresolved. And he understood that. I could see it in the way his expression shifted, not softer, not kinder, but more aware, like he had just uncovered a piece of a puzzle he had not known he was solving. You are not trained. The lead doctor interjected, his voice regaining some of its authority now that the immediate crisis had eased. This was an observation, not a diagnosis. I felt the sting of it, the dismissal trying to reclaim its place, to push me back where I belonged. But Adrian did not look at him, not this time either. His focus stayed on me, unwavering, and yet she was the only one who saw it. He replied simply, and that was enough, more than enough, because in his world, truth did not need to be defended, it only needed to be recognized. My mother's grip tightened slightly, a silent warning, a reminder of who we were, where we stood, what this meant. We should go, she whispered urgently. But I did not move, not yet, not while he was still looking at me like that. Like I was no longer invisible, like I had stepped into something I could not step out of, and then he spoke again, quieter this time, but somehow more final than anything before. You are not leaving, he said, not as a threat, not as a command shouted across a room, but as a simple statement, like a fact that had already been decided, and in that moment, I realized something I should have realized sooner. I had not just saved a life. I had just changed my own. The words did not feel real at first, not because I did not hear them, but because I understood them too well. You are not leaving. He had said it so simply, like he was stating the time or the weather, like it was something that did not need to be argued. And that was what made it dangerous. My mother's hand tightened around my arm, her fingers trembling now, not from anger, but from fear, real fear, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are standing in front of. Sir, please, she said quickly, her voice careful, respectful, almost pleading. She is just a kid. She did not mean to interfere. I felt something twist in my chest at that, not because she was wrong, but because she was trying to pull me back into a world that no longer fit. I was not invisible anymore, not to him, and that changed everything. Adrian did not respond right away. He studied me instead, the way someone studies something unexpected, something rare, not with curiosity, but with intent, like he was deciding where I belonged. Now you interfered, he said finally, his gaze steady, and you were right. The room went quiet again, because those words meant more coming from him than they ever could from anyone else. The lead doctor shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat as if to reclaim some control over the situation. We have adjusted the treatment, he said, more formal now, more cautious. The patient is responding, but we will need continued observation. Adrian nodded once, but his attention did not leave me, not for a second. Then she stays, he said, and this time it was not a suggestion, it was a decision. My breath caught, my mind racing, because staying meant crossing a line I could not uncross. Staying meant stepping fully into something I did not understand. I cannot stay, I said before I could stop myself, the words slipping out faster than I intended. The entire room seemed to pause again, not because of what I said, but because I had said it to him directly. Without hesitation, my mother's grip tightened in warning, but I kept going, my voice steadier now. I am not a doctor. I do not belong here. It was the truth, the only thing I had left to hold on to. Adrian tilted his head slightly, not offended, not surprised, just considering, like I had just presented him with a problem he intended to solve. You belong where you are needed, he replied, calm, certain, and that certainty made my pulse quicken again, because he believed that, completely. And in his world, belief became reality. This is not your decision, my mother added quickly, stepping slightly in front of me now, protective, even though we both knew protection meant very little in this moment. Adrian's gaze shifted to her briefly, not dismissive, but not engaged either. like she was part of the background again, and then it returned to me, sharper than before. "It became my decision the moment you stepped forward," he said quietly. And I felt the weight of that settle over me, heavy, undeniable, because he was right in a way I did not want to admit. I had made a choice, and choices had consequences. The monitors behind me continued their steady rhythm, softer now, more controlled. A reminder that something had changed, something real. I glanced back at the baby, at the small rise and fall of his chest, and something inside me shifted again. Not fear this time, something else, something stronger, responsibility. Because if I walked away now, if something went wrong again, I would know, I would always know. "If I stay," I said slowly, turning back to him, choosing each word carefully. "I am not here because you say so." His expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened slightly, like he was listening more closely now. "I stay because he needs to be watched," I continued, my voice quieter but firm. Not owned, the word hung there, fragile but bold, a line drawn in a place where lines were not supposed to exist. For a second, no one moved, no one spoke. And then something unexpected happened. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, not quite anything I could define, but it was there, real and fleeting. "You speak like someone who does not understand where she is," he said, almost softly, and then, after a brief pause, "But you will." I felt my heartbeat quicken again, not from fear, but from the realization that this was not over, not even close, because in his world, nothing was ever that simple. And I had just become part of it. The room did not return to normal after that. It only pretended to. The doctors moved, spoke, adjusted equipment, but there was a tension underneath everything now, something quieter, sharper, like everyone was aware that the balance had shifted and no one knew exactly how far. I stayed where I was, just to the side of the bed, close enough to watch the monitors, but far enough not to be in the way, or at least that was what I told myself. The truth was I did not trust them to see what I had seen. Not yet, not completely. "Vitals are holding," one of the doctors reported, his tone more careful than before, less certain, like he was choosing each word with intention now. "We need to maintain this trajectory," another added, already adjusting something on the screen. I followed their movements, my eyes catching the small fluctuations, the subtle changes that would have meant nothing to me a few hours ago, but now felt impossible to ignore. The baby's breathing was still uneven, not dangerous, but not stable either. A fragile balance that could tip with the wrong decision. "Slow the adjustment," I said quietly, almost to myself, but the nearest doctor heard it, his head turning slightly, hesitation flickering across his face. He looked toward the lead physician, then toward Adrian, as if waiting for permission from a hierarchy that no longer made sense. "What did you say?" he asked, not dismissive this time, just uncertain. I swallowed, feeling the weight of every eye again, but it was different now, less resistance, more expectation. "You are correcting too quickly," I said, forcing the words out clearly. "His system is already compensating. If you push too hard, you will disrupt the balance you just restored." Silence followed, not hostile, not defensive, just listening. The lead doctor stepped closer, studying the readings again, his expression tightening as he processed what I had said. And then, slowly, he nodded. "Reduce the rate," he instructed, and just like that, they listened, not completely, not blindly, but enough to matter. I felt something shift inside me again, something unfamiliar, something that felt dangerously close to confidence, but I pushed it down, because this was not about me. It could not be. I turned my attention back to the baby, watching the rhythm, the rise and fall, the small details that everyone else had almost missed, and then I felt it again, that presence, closer than before, steady and unavoidable. Adrian stood beside me now, not speaking, not interrupting, just observing, and somehow that was more intense than anything he had said so far. "You are still watching," he said quietly after a moment, his voice low enough that only I could hear it. I nodded slightly, not taking my eyes off the monitors. "Because it is not over," I replied, my voice just as quiet. He was silent for a second. Then, "No," he agreed. And there was something in the way he said it, something that went beyond the situation in front of us, something that felt like it applied to more than just the child on the bed. I finally looked at him, just for a second, and that was enough to feel it. That same intensity, that same focus, but now there was something else layered beneath it, something I could not name. Not yet. You see things differently, he said, not as a question, but as a conclusion. I hesitated, then nodded once. I notice what people ignore, I answered, and for a moment, something almost like understanding passed between us, quiet, unspoken, and then it was gone, replaced by that same controlled calm he always carried. Good, he said simply. And that single word felt like approval in a way that made my chest tighten, not because I wanted it, but because it mattered more than it should have. I turned back to the bed quickly, grounding myself in something real, something measurable, because whatever this was, whatever had started the moment I spoke, it was not something I could control, and deep down, I already knew that was the most dangerous part of all. Time slowed in a way I had never experienced before, not because anything dramatic happened, but because everything became quieter, more precise, like the room itself was holding its breath and adjusting to a new rhythm. The monitors no longer screamed, they spoke. Steady, controlled, a fragile balance that could still break if anyone pushed too far. I watched every number, every subtle shift, my eyes tracing patterns that had started to feel familiar, almost instinctive, and for the first time since I had stepped into that room, I realized something unsettling. I was not guessing anymore. I was understanding. Oxygen levels are stabilizing, one of the doctors said, his voice softer now, almost careful, like he did not want to disturb what was happening. Another checked the readings again, nodding slowly. Neurological response is improving, he added. And there was a note in his voice I had not heard before. Not confidence, not relief. Something closer to respect, not for me, not directly, but for the fact that something had changed and they could not ignore it anymore. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, my shoulders easing just slightly, but I did not step away, not yet, because I knew better now. Improvement was not the same as safety, not in situations like this. The baby's hand moved again, small, controlled, no longer uneven. And that tiny motion felt louder than anything that had happened before. There, I whispered, barely audible, but it did not matter. They saw it too this time. They all saw it, and the room shifted again, this time not from tension, but from something closer to belief. He is responding, the lead doctor confirmed, his tone firm now, grounded in evidence, and that was when the atmosphere changed completely, not chaotic, not frantic, but focused, purposeful. Like everyone had finally aligned toward the same goal. I felt it in the way they moved, in the way they spoke, in the way they listened, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel it too, that quiet, fragile sense of victory, until I felt his hand, not gripping, not controlling, just resting lightly against my wrist, enough to stop me from stepping back, enough to remind me that I was not just part of the room anymore, I was part of something else. Something larger, something I had not agreed to but had already stepped into. I froze for a second, my breath catching at the unexpected contact, not painful, not forceful, just deliberate. I looked up at him, and his gaze met mine instantly, steady, unwavering, like he had been watching me the entire time. You knew, he said quietly, not as a question, but as a statement. I hesitated, searching for the right answer, but there was no simple one. I recognized it. I replied instead, my voice softer now, more honest than before. His fingers did not tighten, did not move. But I felt the weight of that connection, the implication behind it. Recognition like that is not coincidence, he said, his tone calm but edged with something deeper, something that felt like he was already looking beyond this moment, beyond this room, beyond everything I thought mattered. I pulled my wrist back gently. Not resisting, just creating space, needing to remind myself where I ended and where he began. It is not, I agreed, and for a second, neither of us looked away, the world narrowing to that single exchange, until a voice broke through, urgent but controlled. Vitals are holding steady, the doctor announced, and just like that, The moment shifted again, reality rushing back in. I stepped back fully this time, my attention returning to the bed, to the child who was no longer fading. No longer slipping away, but holding on, and that was when it hit me, not all at once, but slowly, like something settling into place. This was not just a moment, not just a coincidence, not just something that would fade when I walked out of this room. This was a turning point, a line I had already crossed without realizing it, because I had not just changed the outcome for him, I had changed the direction of everything that came next. And as I stood there, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, I understood something I could not ignore. I was not just involved anymore, I was already part of it. The room did not celebrate, not out loud, not the way normal people would when something impossible turned into something real. But I could feel it in the way shoulders dropped, in the way voices softened, in the way no one rushed anymore. Because the urgency had shifted into something steadier, something controlled, and for the first time since everything began, there was space to breathe. The baby's chest rose and fell in a rhythm that no longer fought itself. The monitors reflected it. Steady lines instead of erratic spikes, and that quiet consistency felt louder than any alarm ever had. He is stabilizing, the lead doctor said again, this time with certainty, not caution, and no one corrected him, no one questioned it. Because they all saw it now, they all understood what had changed. I stepped back another inch, not because I needed distance from the bed, but because I needed distance from everything else, from the weight of what had just happened, from the way the room had started to look at me differently, like I had crossed into a place I was never meant to reach. My mother moved closer to my side, her presence grounding, familiar, her hand brushing against my arm in a quiet, reassuring gesture. "You did enough," she whispered, her voice low, urgent. "We should go now." I nodded automatically, because leaving was what we always did. Leave before anyone noticed. Leave before anything changed. Leave before consequences had time to catch up. I turned slightly toward the door, ready to step back into the hallway, back into a world where I understood the rules, but then his voice stopped me again, not raised, not sharp, just there, impossible to ignore. "You are not finished," Adrian said calmly, and I felt it before I turned, that same certainty, that same quiet authority that did not need to explain itself. I looked back at him, my heart beating faster again, not from fear, but from something I could not fully name. "He is stable," I said, glancing toward the monitors, toward the proof that this was over, or at least as close to over as it could be. "For now," he replied, and those two words carried more weight than anything else, because they were true. Completely, undeniably true. Stability was not the same as safety, not in situations like this, not when everything had been so close to failing. I hesitated, caught between two realities, the one I knew and the one I had just stepped into. My mother's hand tightened slightly again, a silent reminder, a plea, but I did not move, not yet, because part of me understood what he meant. Part of me knew that walking away now would not feel like relief. It would feel like unfinished work. Like leaving something important behind. "What do you want me to do?" I asked finally, the question coming out quieter than I intended, but clear, direct. His gaze did not waver, not even for a second. "Watch," he said simply, and that single word settled over everything. Not a command shouted across a room, not a demand. Just a decision spoken out loud. I exhaled slowly, turning my attention back to the bed, back to the steady rise and fall, back to the details that still mattered, because he was right, whether I liked it or not. This was not finished, not yet, and as I stood there again, no longer at the edge, no longer invisible, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a different way. I had not just been allowed to stay. I had been chosen to, and in his world, that kind of choice was never temporary, never simple, and never without a cost. The longer I stood there, the clearer it became that nothing in that room was returning to what it had been before. Not the doctors, not the rhythm of the machines, not even the air itself. Everything had shifted into something quieter, more controlled. Like a storm that had not passed, but had learned to hide beneath the surface. I kept my eyes on the baby, on the steady movement of his chest, on the subtle signals that told me he was still holding on, still fighting in a way that no longer felt chaotic, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe it might last, not forever, not perfectly, but long enough to matter. Neurological response is consistent, one of the doctors said, his voice no longer uncertain, no longer guarded. Just factual, grounded, and that alone felt like a victory. Another nodded, confirming the readings. We will continue monitoring, but the immediate risk has passed. Immediate risk, the words echoed in my mind, because I understood now how fragile that phrase was, how temporary, how easily it could change. I folded my arms slightly, not out of defense, but to steady myself, to keep from drifting into something I could not control, because even now, even with everything stabilizing, I could feel it. That invisible line I had crossed, the one that did not exist until the moment I stepped forward, and now refused to disappear. You see it too. Adrian's voice came from beside me again, quieter this time, almost conversational, but still carrying that same weight beneath it. I glanced at him briefly, then back at the bed. It is not finished, I said, not as an opinion, but as a fact. He nodded once, slow, deliberate, like he had expected that answer. Like he had already known it before I said it. No, he agreed, and then there was a pause, not empty, not awkward, but intentional, like something was building beneath the silence, which means neither are you, he added, and those words settled into something deeper than anything else he had said so far, because they were not about the baby anymore. Not really. They were about me, about what came next. About the fact that this moment had not ended when the crisis passed, it had only begun. I felt my breath slow, my thoughts sharpening, because I understood now that leaving would not erase what had happened. It would not return me to the person I was before. That version of me had stayed outside that room, somewhere between the doorway and the first word I spoke, and there was no path back to it. I did what I could, I said quietly, not as a defense, but as a boundary. Something small to hold on to in a situation that had already grown too large. Adrian turned his head slightly, just enough to look at me fully, his expression unreadable, but his attention absolute. And now you will do what comes next, he replied, calm. Certain, like it was not a question, not a request, just the continuation of something that had already been decided. I held his gaze for a second longer than I should have, long enough to feel the weight of it, long enough to understand that in his world, moments like this did not fade, they expanded, they grew into something else, something permanent. I looked back at the baby then, grounding myself in the only thing that still made sense, the steady rhythm, the quiet signs of recovery, the life that had not slipped away, and I realized something that made my chest tighten, not from fear, but from clarity. I had stepped forward because I could not stay silent, because I could not watch something happen that I understood and do nothing, and now that I had done it, now that I had been seen, there was no returning to silence, no returning to invisibility, only forward, only deeper into a world I had never planned to enter. And as I stood there, watching the fragile balance hold, I understood the truth I had been avoiding since the beginning. Saving him had not been the end of the story, it had been the beginning of mine.